Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be setting up my journal for the month of January, and of course I'm using my bullet journal from Arch and Olive, and you can use my code ARTandBujos to get 10% off. Now I know it's pretty late into the month already, but I just wanted to say a quick thank you for your patience as always, and let's get started. Since I'm really busy with my thesis this month, I wanted to do a super simple and quick theme, so I just chose some muted colors that I thought were fitting for January, and I'm also using my Muji Gel Pen for all of the titles and the outlines, as well as some washi tape to tape off different areas. As always, I'm starting with a little overview of the month on the first page, and I'm using this muted blue as a background for the weekdays on the top, and each day is 2 spaces wide, and then I write the weeks underneath in one of the rows and leave 1 space empty in between them. I wrote the weekdays as well as the dates in black, and I kept the lettering super simple, but if you have stamps I think it would look really cute too. I did think about using some, but I ended up deciding against it because I just wanted to save a bit of time. I'm also adding some lines in between the weeks using the dark green shade I picked out, which actually almost looks gray because it's very desaturated, but I really liked the color palette as a whole, so I also added it to the bottom row in the empty spaces for a little splash of color. Moving on to the cover page, first I used that washi tape that I mentioned in the beginning, and for those of you who maybe never used it before, washi tape is a very thin colored tape that's meant to be used on paper and to be easily removable without tearing the paper. They come in all sorts of colors and patterns. I got the one I'm using from StationeryPal, but you should be able to find them in your local art supply store. If you notice that your washi tape does tear the paper, you can try removing some of the stickiness on a different surface or even just on your hand before using it. I just used it to cover up the part where I wanted to place the title, so I don't have to be careful about the drawing and I can just go over it. Now for this month I wanted to make a pattern of leaves and flowers all across the page and then have the title in the middle, and I started with the blue marker and I made some of the bigger leaves. I tried to space them out pretty evenly and in a sort of diagonal pattern, but I also made the ones in the middle face in a different direction for a bit of variation. To me, the easiest way was to go through every color one by one, so it's not too confusing, and I also tried out the pattern beforehand so I could reference my sketch for the placement of each element. Next I used the dark green for some smaller leaves, and I placed them in between the bigger ones, again alternating the direction they're facing in. The pattern definitely didn't turn out perfect, but I thought it still looked really pretty in the end, and for the flowers I used the pink shade and I tried to find some spaces where they would fit, so again in between the leaves. Then I used this yellow shade to add some stars in the rest of the spaces wherever they fit best, and here I went in again with some of the other colors to fill in any more gaps. Lastly, I used the dark green again to add a few dots here and there, which helps to make the pattern look more complete and also to fill in any smaller gaps. In general, I think it's really appealing to mix larger shapes with medium and small elements, just because it looks a lot more balanced, so that's definitely something I like to think about. Next I'm adding the title in the middle of the page, but I actually ended up redoing it later on by just gluing a piece of scrap paper from my old bullet journal on top and writing it again, which you can see here, and I also added a blue border on the outside in addition to the black border because I ended up using the blue more in the other spreads and I thought it would be a bit more cohesive that way. To finish up the pattern, I also wanted to add some outlines to each element, so I used the black Muji Gel Pen and just outlined everything, but I shifted the contours a bit on purpose, so they're not perfect, but I think it just looks really cute this way. I did film the part where I covered the title later on, so that's why there's still the old title in this clip, so yeah, just ignore that part. Originally, I did want to do a different theme for this month, but I ended up deciding on this one because it seemed like it would be more time efficient, and that's also why this video is a bit on the shorter side, so I hope you don't mind. But if you have any suggestions for theme ideas, as always feel free to leave them in the comments. I always love hearing what you guys come up with. But that's it for the first 2 pages, and let's move on to my habit trackers. So for the title, I ended up covering it as well because I didn't really like the way it turned out at first, which is probably because I was rushing a little bit, so I'm just gonna skip it for now and show you the title I went with later on. Next I started making the habit trackers, and first I colored in the background for the title with a blue marker, and each habit is 7 spaces wide and 8 spaces tall, with the title taking up the first row, and then I also left a space empty in between the titles and the actual trackers. In between the trackers there are also 2 spaces empty horizontally and 1 space vertically, so then I just wrote the titles in black again. And the habits I'm tracking are doing my morning routine, not using social media in the morning, getting up before 9 a.m, planning my day in my bullet journal, doing some stretches, and doing my nighttime routine. Then I added the borders for the actual trackers in black as well, and then I used the dark green to make a line underneath where I wanted to write the weekdays, just for some separation, and I wrote the weekdays in black again. Lastly, I also crossed out the days from February, so I don't accidentally fill them out, and I used the pink and the yellow shade and alternated between them. So then for the title, I covered the old one again with a bit of scrap paper, and this works especially well because I added a border on the outside, so that kind of conceals the edges of the paper. Anyway, I first colored in the background for the title in blue, and then I used the black to write habits in a very basic script. Then I made the same pattern as on the cover page on both sides of the title, and I tried not to go over the edge of the paper, and then I also added the black outlines again. At first I didn't include the pattern in the middle part where I wrote the title, but I ended up adding it because it felt a bit empty otherwise. Underneath my daily habits I also added some weekly ones, so I first counted out how many spaces each habit would need, and then I colored in the background in blue. Then I wrote the habits in black, and I used the grid spaces as a guide so each letter fits into one of the spaces, and this month I wanted to track making my weekly spreads, having a self-care day, doing a weekly reset, and practicing piano. To track them, I added 5 circles, 1 for each week on the right side, and when I completed I will color it in, and if I don't I will cross them out. Then I just added some lines with the dark green in between to fill the empty space. All the way on the bottom I wanted to include some more of the pattern as decoration so that it makes a sort of border together with the title on the top, so I'm just using those same colors and drawing the leaves and flowers and everything. To me, it was actually a lot of fun creating the pattern because it doesn't have to be perfect, and the doodles themselves are super easy and quick to draw, so it didn't really require a lot of thought or precision. I used some more of the washi tape around the borders so that I didn't have to be super careful around the edges, and then once I removed it, I added another black border just like for the title on the top. For the next page, I'm making my usual sort of planning layout for the month that I've been including in my last couple of setups, and it just helps me to keep track of tasks, events, and so on for the whole month, because I only ever create one weekly spread at a time, so I can put everything else for the future in here, and then transfer it into my weekly spreads whenever I end up making them. For the title, I just wrote January, and I did everything the same as for my habits to keep things nice and consistent, so I added the pattern around the title and then added the black border all around. I also just reused the washi tape from the other sections because I didn't want to just waste it. Then I'm creating my usual sections, and these haven't changed at all, so there are 6 in total, 3 on each side, and I make them a bit different in size depending on how much space I need for each one, which usually works out pretty well. Normally I make them 11 spaces wide and I leave 2 spaces empty in between them. However, this time the title ended up being 1 space wider, so I had to make them 11.5 spaces wide, but still with 2 spaces in between them horizontally and then 1 space vertically. The sections are for my monthly tasks, workouts, my next YouTube video, some self-care ideas, events, and goals, and I wrote all of the titles in black into the middle of the sections. Since I wanted to add a bit more color to the spread, I decided to include the pink flowers and the yellow stars in the bottom right corner of the boxes, and I also added some of the dark green dots. Then, just like for my habit trackers, I left another space empty in between the title and the actual section, and then I made the borders using a ruler and the black Muji Gel Pen. I really love how these 2 pages turned out, so let's move on to my first weekly spread of the month. This time I wanted to use a super simple layout with pretty minimal decoration, so for this one I first split the page into 8 equal sections, 7 for my daily sections and 1 for a mini calendar, and the boxes are 11 spaces wide and 17 spaces tall, and I leave 2 spaces empty in between the sections, so both horizontally and vertically. As you can see, I used the blue marker once again as a background for the titles, and then I wrote the weekdays as well as the dates in black. I wanted to add a bit more color again, so I used all 4 markers to draw the different elements from the pattern into the lower right corners. I tried to kind of draw them in the same order, but it didn't quite work out because otherwise the second blue leaf would be right underneath the first one. So I just kind of switched it up so that it looks more varied. I hope that makes sense. I added some more of those dark green dots and then I made all of the borders in black, once again leaving one space empty in between the title and the sections. I also left out the part where I made the doodles and I marked it with some pencil because sometimes it can be a bit hard to see where to stop if the ruler covers it up. Then for that first section, like I mentioned, I wanted to include a mini calendar because I really like having an overview of the dates in my weekly spreads, so I used the blue again as a background for the weekdays and I placed it into the middle of the section so that I can fill the rest of the space around it with the pattern, which is what I'm doing here, and I did cover the mini calendar with tape to make it a bit easier for myself again. I think the color palette and especially the contrast between the colors is really what makes this pattern and theme work. So if you don't have the exact same markers, make sure to pick some that have a similar value, which is how bright or dark a color is. For example, you could switch out the dark green for a dark blue or dark red, and the other colors are pretty light, but they have different kinds of contrasts because there are warm and cool tones, like the blue is cool toned and the yellow and pink are more warm toned colors. So I hope this helps if you want to recreate this theme, and that brings us to the end of this video, so let's do a quick flip through. I know this video was super late, but if you really like this theme, you can always save it for a different month, so I hope you still enjoyed this video. As always, if you have any questions or suggestions, please leave them in the comments. I always try to answer every single one, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to my channel if you enjoy my content. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I hope I'll see you again next time. Bye!